Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am head of news for the Cradle, and as usual, I am joined by my colleagues, a content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmin Narwani. And before we start, as usual, please make sure to like, to share, to subscribe to our channel, to follow us on our social media platforms, and to check out our Patreon, where you can become a supporter of the Cradle. So today we start one day removed from the beginning of a three-phase ceasefire deal for Gaza that has so far put an end to the horrific genocide we have all been witness to in the Strip. We have seen families flood back to the north of Gaza. We have seen humanitarian trucks finally enter the Strip. And as far as the actual terms of the deal, we already saw the prisoner exchange. As part of the first phase, we saw the release of three Israeli captives held in Gaza in exchange for about 90 Palestinians from Israeli prisons, most of them women and children. And this is supposed to build up to the release of about 1,000 Palestinian prisoners and the release of, about 90 or something Israeli captives who remain inside the Strip. As part of the first phase, negotiations need to go on 16 days into the first stage for the second phase, which aims to secure the release of all remaining prisoners and achieve a permanent ceasefire, as well as facilitate the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. The third phase will focus on returning all the remaining bodies and initiating the reconstruction of Gaza, as overseen by Egypt, Qatar, and the United Nations. So there's already talk in Israeli media about how long will this ceasefire even last. We know from all of the reports that have been coming in that this was a lot of pressure on the Netanyahu government coming from Donald Trump, who is set to be inaugurated in just a few hours' time as we are recording this. But as I said, already reports in Israeli media talking about Trump cannot trust Netanyahu, and of course they point to the past year and 3 months in which Netanyahu has repeatedly sabotaged ceasefire deals. And, to this point, and one last thing that I'll say is Abu Obeida's speech from yesterday, the Hamas, the Qassam Brigade spokesman, in which he said, this deal could have been signed a year ago if it had aligned with Netanyahu's political ambitions, because the terms of the deal, some of which I described, align very closely to the terms that were already in the table in May 2024. Not much has changed besides a few words. So, having said that, what do you guys make of this deal? And, well, of the optics, right, of seeing the Palestinians celebrating after 15 months of genocide?
I mean, the first thing I think was, this Israeli effort to make sure that there were no displays of joy in Palestine, which was ridiculous. How are they going to stifle joy? And joy we saw in every way from every kind of Palestinian, whether they support the resistance or not. There was a euphoric feeling of victory, which I think people outside the Palestinian territories maybe can't understand, because we've obviously seen Gaza flattened, a genocide take place, upward of 47,000 Palestinians killed, 100,000 injured, lot of amputees, psychological distress, loss of homes, livelihood, everything, inability to find basics, even water or electricity. So it seems weird to see the euphoria, the sense of absolute victory that we're seeing on the streets of Palestine. And it's burning a hole through the heads of the Israelis, 100%. But I think most importantly was the visual of resistance fighters, Palestinian resistance fighters showing up everywhere, in every single governorate of the Gaza Strip. Everywhere. Fighters and police and security forces instantly, right? There was a delay of the ceasefire from, I think, 8:30 a.m. on Sunday to 11-something on Sunday. The Israelis delayed it because they didn't get a list from Hamas, which was just the names of the three people, the three women who were released, who, by the way, looked like they were in great shape.
They left Gaza with a gift bag, too.
Yeah,
that was some interesting.
they got Hamas gift bags, and what pleasant people. Um, and today, with the release of the detainees, this is really, really important. Operation Al-Aqsa Flood in October 2023 was in very large part, an operation to gain leverage by taking Israeli prisoners of war to be able to get the release of Palestinian prisoners. And yesterday, that began. They gained their most basic and main achievements in the war. But there are others that I think Abu Ubaidah alluded to, and we can get to that. Just want to mention today, Israeli forces shot a child and seriously injured him in Rafah in Gaza. So, they can't contain themselves. They can't contain anything that feels like a loss to them or a gain to their enemy.
Yeah, or
Um,
even following rules in Gaza, because we know they have been operating as as a mercenary army would, right? Like with absolutely no rules, no concerns, no considerations, no repercussions.
Correct, correct. Um, Abu Ubaida's speech was meaningful. First of all, what we got to see was that Abu Ubaidah, who had gone silent for many, many months, the spokesman for Hamas, was alive and well and, delivering fiery speeches as usual, not mincing words. We know that the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Mohammed Sinwar, brother of the martyr Yahya Sinwar, is still leading the resistance organization and very well, as we saw in the last 2 months of the battle in northern Gaza, where Israeli troops were getting shot, killed, injured every single day. And new tactics were being used, and the Israelis could not handle it. And then we also had confirmation of that Mohammed Deif, who is the sort of mastermind military commander of the Palestinian resistance, is alive. So what has Israel done? And Hamas fighters everywhere. And we know that there have been, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, joining Hamas during the course of the 15 years of battle. On what level did Israel win? We wrote last week that it was a devastating victory for the Palestinian resistance or the Palestinian people, and it was a smug defeat for the Israelis because they did get to flatten Gaza. They did get to show their military power, but in the end, yesterday we saw that the Israelis cannot achieve war aims. And we forget that they didn't achieve them in Lebanon either, which we can get to a little bit later. But Abu Ubaidah, in his speech, said the Al-Aqsa Front operation, a flood operation, began on Gaza's front lines, but it changed the region's dynamics and introduced new equations in the conflict with the Israeli entity. It forced the occupation to seek international support and weapons. It could not. It could not do this alone. We saw this after the first month. It could not do this alone. And it forced Israel to open new battlefronts or forced new battlefronts onto Israel. And he also importantly said, on the propaganda front, which Israel has always had a massive advantage in, that advantage is completely dissipated. Abu Ubaidah said, we sent a message to the world that the occupation is a great lie. And this is very, very important because, I've always argued that Israel stands on two legs. One is its victimhood narrative, which is completely gone, and the other is Jews moving there, something that I think we're going to see deteriorate even further after the war. Many, hundreds of thousands left during the war. Many more will leave, I believe, in the years to come. So what Abu Ubaidah was summing up was, in actuality, what are we left with after the ceasefire on Sunday? The Palestinian issue is brought front and center globally. Israel's narrative has been destroyed. It was one of, like I've said, the two protectors of the state. And now lawsuits, boycotts, these will only intensify. The Palestinian resistance showed it is no longer alone. There was this idea like if the Arabs didn't see it as the cause anymore, it was just going to disappear, and it did. But the Palestinian resistance had many countries on which it relied during this war, in terms of arms, in terms of support fronts. Um, and Israel was struck with ballistic missiles and armed drones throughout this conflict, something it's never endured before. These are new quantities that didn't exist prior to this war, and they won't go back into a neat box. Once the box lid has been opened, you can't put these things back. And then let's not forget this was an imposed ceasefire in Israel. It didn't want this. Netanyahu did not want this. Tel Aviv was unable to destroy the regional and domestic resistance, and was forced to end its war prematurely. This is a huge loss for Israel's political clout and military prestige globally.
Yeah, 100%. Karim, give us your take.
First, what happened is that we all know it's now very clear that Trump, who was elected for president of United States, was able to stop the war in 1 week. That tells us that Biden administration and the whole West, they did nothing to stop this war. And first and second, this also tells me that no Muslim or Arab country even tried to, and there was no pressure on Israel, because the first pressure that was exerted by Israel from Trump, they accepted the deal and they were obliged to sign the deal. So this also, just to tell our viewers that 99% of what we heard from Biden administration or from the Arab countries is fake, and they are all lies. And of course, what happened is like, for me, it's a miracle. We often read in history stories, and I usually think to myself, oh, this happened, how this happened? And this is the first story, or this is the first miracle that I lived, which was Gaza. It's a miracle that after the ceasefire, we saw all these people went out to the streets, and everybody was cheering, and we didn't see anybody that blaming the resistance. First, because this is their right. They didn't try to invade a country and they failed. So people will tell them why you did that. They did this to cut back the prisoners and to give hope to the whole world, and especially Muslims and Arabs, that this land can be liberated. This is the most important thing that I saw yesterday. And of course, during the war, I was thinking to myself that we will never see a hostage operation again. I don't. That's what I was thinking. I
A
don't think.
prisoner exchange, you mean?
Yeah, no, not prison exchange, an operation to capture an Israeli.
Not capture. Okay.
But now, after what I saw yesterday, I said to myself, no, now Palestinians can capture more Israelis, because now Israelis don't want the war more than the Palestinians. And at the beginning, you see all this devastation, you saw all of these people killed. Everybody was thinking, is it worth it? But I think at the end, it was worth it. And I think now, if anything happens, now Palestinians can capture more Israelis.
Everything that came out of the box, everything new, is now on the table.
Yeah, 100%. To clarify what Sharmin is saying is that, for instance, if there's a new war erupted against Israel in the region, the Yemenis will not wait 3 months to participate. They will participate from day one, and they will stop the ships linked and يعني linked Israeli ships and Israeli ships from day one. And the Iraqis will not wait like 3-4 months to start targeting U.S. interests and drone operation against Israel. All what we saw will start in day one, and hopefully Hezbollah will recover. And I think they should learn from Hamas, because the feeling that the scenes that made us feel the victory, and the videos yesterday and even today, we didn't saw it we didn't see the same part comes out from Lebanon or from Hezbollah. I think they should learn that. And
I think you forget. I think you forget the scenes we saw when it happened in Lebanon.
yeah, it was
Everybody lost their
scenes
shit
from the
after
people.
Syria, but in Lebanon, when the ceasefire was struck, you had people amassing to drive to the south. People feeling like, we achieved something. Those scenes were so easily forgotten when Syria fell and everyone became distracted,
Yeah, but I was talking about the Hezbollah fighters. We didn't see Hezbollah fighters. I didn't see a Hezbollah guy with his weapons celebrating, because this is like a defeat for Israelis. And
It's a
yesterday
different
I spent,
organization.
maybe you feel that I am somehow not somehow I'm sleepy, because yesterday I spent the whole night just reading and translating from Telegram, the conversation between the Israelis and the Telegram channels, and not a single one was happy. Everybody felt defeated, and some of the comments like stood up for me. They said we might win the war, but we can't win against such people, and many other more. Yeah, and it does said, where were these people? Is there two Gazas? And is there another alternative universe? And people were saying, from where all these cars, from all these people came out, they were referring to the fighters of Hamas.
Yeah.
So, so
I mean, the
هلا
sentiment,
yes,
the sentiment on Israeli media was, what have we been doing for the past 15 months?
yes,
What have we been doing for the past year? And actually, what I just wanted to interject very quickly is this quote from Giora Eilan, the former Israeli general, or well, in reserve, who is the architect of the general's plan, right? The general's plan is this plan to ethnically cleanse the north of Gaza. Is what we were seeing, in Jabalia, in Beit Hanun, etc. This approach to ethnically cleanse. He said yesterday in an interview with Channel 12, Hamas won, Israel lost, and he described the ceasefire as a resounding failure. And now this is the sentiment that is going across Israeli media and the Israeli government, right? You saw the party, the Otzma Yehudit from Itamar Ben-Gvir withdraw from the coalition, leaving Netanyahu with a slight majority in government. And now you've been hearing over the past couple of days the finance minister talk about how this ceasefire is not going to last, that they need to reignite the war. And on Sunday, Amit Segal, who is an Israeli pundit affiliated with Netanyahu, said that he said this on Israeli TV, he expects only 10 of the 94 captives still in Gaza will be released before the fighting resumes. So that's kind of the state of affairs in Israel, right? Like this dejection, this realization that they failed, and also the realization that the war is going to restart sooner rather than later.
This is going to be interesting. I'm not sure how, after 45 days, which is a long time, here in Lebanon, we know what 60 days feels like of the ceasefire, never ending. After 45 days, which Israelis, citizens, will actually tolerate war being launched again? And what's going to happen in those 45 days? Let's again remind people that this was an imposed ceasefire on Israel. Came from outside and basically said, you're going to do it. You're going to do it now, asshole. Like that was pretty much, yeah. Today, Trump becomes president in the United States. He doesn't care about Palestinians in the least. His goals are completely aligned with Israel's, but he has an actual agenda. He comes back into office with guns firing, his entire cabinet already lined up and intending to force his agenda. For sure, this man learned things from his first 4 years, and he wasn't going to come back in the same way, some outsider who didn't know who to hire, who to trust, etc. He's hiring people he trusts. We can see many of them are not qualified for the roles. He's just hiring people he trusts. He doesn't want Israel's constant distractions. Israel has been able to redirect every recent U.S. president's agenda as it's wanted, because every single U.S. president has been, in the end, part of the whole, permanent state apparatus. You don't mess with the Israel lobby. You don't mess with Israel's interests. You just avoid it because it's not good for your career, right? Trump comes in sounding like a bigger, fatter Zionist than all the others, right? Which he probably is, actually, despite Biden's claim of being the biggest, fattest Zionist on the planet. And he having, established that fact and not being slavish to the swamp, the permanent state. And being a businessman who wants to cut through, the bullshit and the red tape and get things done, is what made Netanyahu. I always thought Netanyahu was actually scared of Trump. I don't think there's anyone else that Netanyahu is scared of. And, now Trump's going to push his agenda. He may be completely aligned with Netanyahu's dreams and fantasies, but he doesn't want the distraction. This is one president who could easily flick Netanyahu aside if the latter tries to distract the former from his main agenda. So what is Netanyahu going to do? Israel will be forced out of all of Lebanon and Gaza, in my view. It will be forced out of all of Lebanon. And he cannot afford for Israelis to refocus on their domestic ills, the economy, his legal battles for criminality inside Israel, and his inability to travel anywhere in the world, his pariah status, except for a handful of countries because of the ICC's war crimes case against him. Israel's international legal battles will continue and grow. You're going to find mega companies that brought billions into Israel's economy, despite the war being over, being hesitant to re-enter. And that will make Netanyahu as a person, as a politician, expendable to even the biggest powers that support Israel. Because they're not getting rid of Israel. They're just going to have to get rid of Netanyahu. And he will potentially become a nagging problem that needs to go away, okay? But he's a master politician, may turn to the West Bank and Syria and the immediate future to stir things up there. He's not going to turn his back away from Yemen. He's going to want to keep escalating, anywhere to keep the sort of Israelis from focusing their attention on him and his terrible, terrible record, since the war started and before, and investigating how October 7th happened. They've constantly kicked that can down the road and tried to postpone these kind of investigations. And Netanyahu will continue to make a case with the Americans over war with Iran. But he no longer controls the levers that he has with every single administration. And he cannot argue that Trump's a traitor, Trump's an anti-Semite, because, Trump's American supporters like, what are you talking about? He's like full on board. You're just being a pain in the butt, and Netanyahu has to go. We keep Israel, just lose Netanyahu. So
that has been the rhetoric, that has been the rhetoric for the past 15 or some months. That was Biden's whole thing, right? This is about Netanyahu.
Yeah, well, but it's an easy fix, right? If you just get rid of the one guy and try to rehabilitate Israel, which will not be able to be done. But, let's not forget Netanyahu's words on, when the ceasefire happened. He said, quote, "I vow to complete all war goals with full support from Biden and Trump. First phase of the deal is a temporary ceasefire. Trump and Biden support Israel's right to resume fighting if the second phase is not fruitful." Now, he's going to do everything to sabotage the second phase. Question is, does the international community, do his allies, his closest allies, do Israelis have any appetite to have the war restart?
And the ability also, because they already fought 15 months. And if I was an Israeli soldier, God forbid, and I saw what happened after the ceasefire, why should I fight again? And I just want to...
Trump will give Israel some big items. He will give them some perception wins. He will annex the West, whatever. He will, he gave them the Golan Heights and he gave them East Jerusalem. Nobody else recognized it except an island or two associated with the Americans. But here's the thing. He's going to give them some biggies. Just note that they mean nothing. Okay, they're meant to placate Israelis. But if Israel and Netanyahu keeps insisting and grinding, he becomes very expendable to Trump.
Yeah, I just want to mention something that we missed regarding Abu Ubaidah. I think the most important thing in his speech was when he thanked who helped the Gazans and Hamas. And for me, this is the most just cause in human history. And unfortunately, only 4 entities or countries helped this cause, which were Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Ansarullah in Yemen, and he thanked also the people of Jordan because there were cross-border operations. So in the whole world, only four countries or entities stood up with Hamas, and again, the most just cause in a human history. There's no just cause يعني, clearer than that. And unfortunately, only four entities and a country stood up with these guys, and the whole world, including Europeans, Americans, Japanese, Koreans, the whole Arab countries were against, maybe except Algeria, were against Hamas and its just cause in this operation.
Yeah, it's interesting that he mentioned Jordan, though, because we always.
He was very specific. He said the people of Jordan who helped us and crossed the borders and made operation. He didn't,
Yeah,
of course.
Of course, he was talking about those people, but still, why mention that? It just bears mentioning that the majority of Jordan's population is of Palestinian origin.
Yeah, he was specific. He
Yeah.
said Hezbollah and the Lebanese people, the Iraqi resistance, Jordanian people, and Iran as a country. And of course, Yemen's Ansarullah. These were the only, and unfortunately, these countries, we know they are poor. Maybe they have capabilities, but they are poor. And on the other hand, we have Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE. We have many rich Arab countries that not. I hope they did nothing, but we know that they did the opposite and they aided Israel.
And yesterday and today, we heard nonstop officials from these entities and countries saying, Mabruk, Hamas, Mabruk, Muqawama, and that flood will continue. And the analysis and how this was a victory. I mean, the malaise and the defeatism that had struck Lebanon, which I really note didn't happen until Syria was taken. For some reason, it really didn't manifest until Syria was taken, even though it was unrelated to Lebanon directly. I think it just gave a sense of an Israeli clean sweep, that we forget that the Lebanese ceasefire was insisted upon by the Israelis. They wanted it. They pushed the Americans for it, whereas the Americans imposed the ceasefire in Gaza. So Lebanon was not a defeat for the Lebanese. So the flood of support from these organizations and countries is going to reverse that psychological operation, the emotional sense of defeat that has just been like ringing in our ears, when if you look at the actual facts without emotion, you can see who gained and who lost. The Israelis did not win in any one of these theaters, not a single one. And yet Lebanon felt defeated once Syria was taken. Now we will be re-examining, and in the analysis that comes out in the next days and weeks, we're going to see that narrative grow. Because now, today, everybody's feeling that the Palestinian resistance, which we've long called the weakest link in the axis of resistance as, member states and entities, is now the one to have dealt a very strong defeat to Israel. And what is a defeat? It doesn't mean leveling a country as much as the Americans and Israelis think it is. It means the inability to achieve your war goals.
Exactly. But one thing we should point out in particular is that the stated war goals are indeed, were indeed to the complete defeat of Hamas. A poll came out over the weekend in Israel by Hebrew media saying that about 81% of Israelis agree that the war goals were not achieved. But there's a difference between, what the Israeli government said were the goals and what we know were the goals. And I think what we know were the goals were, the eradication of the Palestinian population, the making the Gaza uninhabitable, collective punishment. We're talking about before the ceasefire came into effect, the Gaza Health Ministry put out some figures. They were talking about 1,600 families erased from the civil registry completely. Right, we're talking about around 18,000 children killed. Just massacre after massacre. Just right now, before we started recording, Al Jazeera was reporting that the health ministry received about 122 martyrs over the past 24 hours. This is already as the ceasefire has been in effect for over a day. In Rafah, they're discovering more and more bodies, and this is going to become as long as this ceasefire holds, we're going to see more and more the death toll rise, because all of a sudden the Palestinians are able to dig and look for their loved ones. And we know that Israel has been deliberately destroying bodies, destroying the evidence, or the attacks have been so intense on first responders, on ambulances, that they can simply never reach all of the
Yeah.
victims. So
And already
I
today,
agree with you,
Esteban,
but at the
and
same
the
time, we need to mention this as well, right? That there's been like wholesale destruction that cannot be undone.
and already today, the Cradle has posted many pictures of skulls that have been dug up and body parts and skeletons, and it's that's on day one. Like, imagine when they
Yeah.
get deeper
Imagine
into
what
these like
machinery goes
2,000
in. Yeah.
the 2,000-pound bombs that Israel was dropping for much of this war. Like, there's a lot of digging that's going to happen, and we're just going to see. I mean, really, really, this is the Holocaust of our times. The kinds of visuals we're seeing are just, unprecedented. So this doesn't go. Israel's pariah status just will continue to grow and grow and intensify. So I don't know how it can come back after 45 days. Israel, of course, as we have all learned about it now, will come up with many excuses, try to blame many things on Hamas, trying to even manufacture violations on the part of the Palestinian resistance in order to get back in there. And they, the Axis has learned that from the Lebanese ceasefire that you can't turn off the firepower on Israel, otherwise they will violate ceasefires, correct? Over 1,000 violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon by Israeli forces specifically during less than 60 days. And so Yemen has come out on day one and said, we will not stop hitting Israel during this time. We will ensure that Israel is forced to stick to the terms of the
Yeah.
ceasefire. When it violates the ceasefire, we will have no red lines, no limits in responding.
Yeah.
And this is a very, very good threat, I think, to hang over
Yeah,
Netanyahu's head.
it's actually worth mentioning that today, as we are recording this, AP came out with this news item talking about that Yemen contacted shipping companies and told them that it's safe to pass through the Red Sea, that they would only continue targeting specifically Israeli ships or ships linked to Israel. In other words, they are saying the ban on Israeli ships in the Red Sea continues, but we will no longer be attacking other ships. Now, of course, the
Were
shipping
they
giants.
attacking other ships? They were only.
They were attacking U.S. and U.K. linked ships too because of the attacks that were
No, but the
that have been
US and
going on.
UK, I mean, I feel like that announcement was always, like pointless because the US and UK will continue to attack Yemen.
That
If
is
they
their
pull
plan.
back, that's like yet another victory for the Axis, to be honest. But let's not forget that yesterday, on the day of the ceasefire, right, Ansarullah attacked the USS Harry Truman
Yeah,
aircraft carrier for the 8th time. So
they were
Yemen's
already forced
watching.
two aircraft carriers out of the Red Sea
Yeah.
by using the same tactic.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. What do you think, Karim? What do you think's next for Ansar Allah?
I think maybe they will keep on targeting Israeli ships until the deal is over, and afterwards everything will be back as normal. As
But
simple
the
as that.
thing is, that's true if Israel can hold itself back. Can Israel hold itself back and suffer that humiliation of not responding to Yemen? If they do open continue and accelerate and escalate the front against Yemen, Yemen will continue this against Israel, whether or not there's a Gaza ceasefire.
I think they can. يعني, I think the humiliation that they felt and they are experiencing now in Gaza is greater than what they experienced from Yemen. Yemen is very far, and Yemen is like 555 kilometers squared. It has more than around 33 million people, not like Gaza. Gaza is as big as a city, or it's exactly as big as Las Vegas. And imagine Las Vegas stood against the whole West and won. A lot of people, and this is a humiliation. Yeah, I don't see that they can continue, and especially front don't want new fronts. يعني their master doesn't want new fronts. I don't think they will open the fronts. I
Yeah.
know Israelis usually they use like operations. They conduct operation and they accuse other people, so the United States will enter the wars or whatever. But I don't think Netanyahu currently is capable of doing this. Now Netanyahu, I think today or tomorrow, ministers will start to resign from his government,
Mhm.
and maybe the government will not last. Nobody knows. We are in
Well,
a critical situation.
Ben Gavir's out.
Yeah,
Smotrich
Bangladesh is
stays for
out.
now. He's trying and will try his best to ensure that the war is back on and all of Gaza is flattened and back in Israeli control. They're all saying, including what's his name, Jake Sullivan, God, warmonger, that Hamas will never rule Gaza. But when you look at Gaza since yesterday, it looks like everybody in the streets of Gaza, despite their colossal loss, okay, in their families and their homes and their livelihood, in basic living conditions, are jubilant and hugging and shaking hands of the resistance, and kids saying, these are our heroes, etc. They've become legends, and and the thing is, now the race starts to see who's going to govern Gaza, because one element, a very strong element in this region and overseas, is saying there's no way we can have Hamas in there. But how are you going to stop it? How are you actually going to stop it? So the Palestinian Authority is insisting, um, and Israel's allies also are supporting the Palestinian Authority's participation in a Gaza government without Hamas. The Palestinian Authority's popularity in the West Bank that it governs fully is in the single digits. Okay, how are they going to? And West Bankers since yesterday are on the streets. There's even Hamas fighters in the West Bank who came onto the streets to celebrate with West Bank residents. This is, I mean, the Palestinian Authority just looks like an absolute, Israel's dog, especially after its siege of of Jenin camp, and its attacks on Jenin and Palestinian resistance fighters in this last month or so. So, I mean, the fight is on who's going to govern next, how they'll even make this manifest, without Hamas, without not even people who belong to the organization, but those who literally believe in resistance now. Because what yesterday showed is that resistance works. Okay, deal making, bloody Oslo, whatever, it's bullshit. Resistance, force, military operations works. And that's the big takeaway.
Though, I mean,
Yeah, of course. It will continue like this because they have no other chance. They will cease to exist. So prior to this conversation, Esteban was saying, I mean, there was huge losses. Of course, there were huge losses. There are people that are under occupation, and history tells us that there's even people that sacrificed more than what happened in Gaza. Like Algeria, they lost, they say, from 1.5 million to 2 million. When we hear this number, we don't think of it, but the variation is 500,000, which is 10 times more than what
Yes.
was lost in Gaza. But now Algeria is a strong country, not like other countries. And for instance, I respect Algeria more than respecting any other Arab country because they fought for their independence.
And
And
they
the
stayed
same applies
independent.
to Vietnam and other
Mm.
places. And we can say Cuba, Venezuela, now they are weak because the American hegemony is at its peak, but
they've been
nobody knows
weakened.
what happened after 10 years. The USSR collapsed, Syria collapsed. We are living in a century so weird, yeah. So we have to wait and see. But of course, the losses doesn't say who won or who lost, because we know in World War II, Germany lost like 15 million, less soldier than the Russia or USSR, but eventually USSR won.
Yeah,
You
but
know what I mean?
the Israelis have always had this view that if you don't win a war decisively, you've lost. And this is what a lot of its supporters also believe,
And
Americans, etc.
to that point, actually, I'm just seeing this now. Smotrich, right, the finance minister, just gave an interview on Israeli army radio in which, on the second day of the ceasefire, he's talking about establishing the need to establish a military government in Gaza, that there shouldn't be Palestinians in power, that the Israeli army needs to come in and rule Gaza, which is, the big question at the end of this. It's the claim in the ceasefire, in the terms, right? The terms of the ceasefire call for a Israeli withdrawal and the third phase of the deal. And we have talked about this before. We've talked about the Netzarim corridor, how it's essentially become a big span of occupation of a permanent military basis. The Philadelphia corridor, which at the end, in the last minutes before the ceasefire was finally implemented, again became a point of contention because Netanyahu doesn't want the army to exit there. If anything, he wants to militarize it more. This is the area bordering with Egypt. So I know, Charmaine, you've talked about this before, about how, and you have a term that I cannot remember, about how Israel is incapable to adhering to any agreement. And are you guys sure, actually? Because a few minutes ago you said that maybe with Trump doesn't want, Karim, you said Trump doesn't want to open new fronts. I actually feel the opposite to that, because I feel like Trump's coming in with a vengeance, right? He's coming in like complete opposite from his first term. When he says America first now, he means America first everywhere, right? Like, I'm gonna take half of the world and you're gonna like it.
Yeah, I mean, but we're here in West Asia, and the Cradle covers West Asia, and our focus is this. I mean, there's going to be, I think the term, by the way, I use is a Russian translated term, agreement incapable.
Increment total.
Agreement incapable. The U.S. is agreement incapable. But we know this going in. And so this is why Hamas insisted on its terms from the start and would not veer, because it understood if things were not spelled out and timelined and detailed, that Israel would reinterpret any agreement whichever way they wanted. Now Israel has a lot of pressures. So in this case, its absolute closest ally forced this deal on Israel. The same deal that Hamas had approved in May. Israel had to, basically swallow its pride and sign on to the same deal, one that Hamas wanted. And so I think moving forward, like I said, Netanyahu is a master politician. He is going to try to sabotage various elements of the ceasefire. He has access to all the world's English language media and more,
Yes.
and will spin this for all he's worth. But in the end, nobody wants a Gaza war to restart. I mean, if I was the resistance, the first thing I'd do is like literally bomb all the installations and roadworks that Israel created. I mean, just to continue the humiliation, like bomb the Netzarim corridor where they're not in. This creates, work for them when they come back, correct? If they try to come back. Like you have to psychologically make them feel like, oh my God, we're going to have to do that again. You have to chip away at their willingness to re-engage, which I think a lot of Israelis will have, but also their ability to redo the same things. In 45 days, Hamas is going to fortify itself militarily even further. It will booby trap things. It will take measures that puts Israel on the back foot, or Israeli troops, if they decide to re-enter. And I just don't think anyone has the tolerance of it. I mean, everyone is globally, including Israel's friends, pretty much sick of Netanyahu. And the Israeli opposition have really taken a hammer to him. And I think what's going to be interesting is the hostages coming out, probably frothing, because they're also hearing from their family members about how Netanyahu's government at every turn, tried to sabotage any deal for the captives. And so, there's going to be, like I said, Israel doesn't have control over all the levers anymore. And it's going to get hit hard.
It's going to be interesting to see the first interviews that the captives, the released captives, give. We know beforehand that they are, they receive training
Yeah.
beforehand, right? Because remember, they during the first captive release, all of these statements that they were giving that were, completely
Yeah.
opposite to everything
Hamas
we
was
were
so
hearing
nice to
about.
us,
Yeah. Remember when the biggest complaint was like the kid wouldn't give me a candy, the
Yeah.
children, and he's
Yeah.
so cruel.
Yeah.
He's so cruel because he
Yeah.
didn't give me, some candy. So we'll have to see. Again, I made mention to this earlier. Hamas is very good at or I guess the resistance axis in general. They have a good media apparatus, and we saw it yesterday with the release of these three captives with this video that they shot, in which they show them, in perfect health, in perfect condition, well
Qassam
fed.
Brigades has a good
The
media
Qassam brigade.
operation. The resistance axis does not.
Okay, you're right. Maybe I am being a bit too generous, but Kazan brigades, yes, you're complete. And we saw it, right? Like I made mention to this. They giving the gift bags with the souvenirs. This is just like part of like psychological warfare at the end of the day, because they know what is being said about them. So they go and they do these things to make sure, right? To poke at the Israeli enemy. So before we finish off for this week, let's talk a bit about what's happening in Lebanon, right? As you mentioned, Charmin, a few minutes ago, the ceasefire in Lebanon, well, honestly, ill-named ceasefire because the attacks from the Israelis continue. It's set to end in a few days. I think by the end of this week, it's when the Israeli troops are supposed to leave. Last week, our podcast last week, we recorded it as the Lebanese president was naming its prime minister, right? Former International Court of Justice Judge Nawaf Salam. And over the past week, interesting movements internally in Lebanon. It seemed for a few days at least, the what is known as the Shia duo, right, which is Hezbollah and the Amal movement, were very reticent, were very opposed to Salam, and to even having talks. They didn't vote for him. They didn't vote against him either. They just didn't vote during his election. But now we are hearing, Al Akhbari is reporting that some bridges are being built, that the Amal and Hezbollah have met with Nawaf Salam over the weekend. What are you guys hearing? What are you guys seeing in Lebanon? And what can we expect once the ceasefire with Israel, the 60-day ceasefire comes to an end?
First of all, I think there's nothing you can say about Lebanon politically right now until we see the lineup of Nawaf Salam, the new prime minister's selected cabinet, and who will be named as the new army chief. Okay, this is very important. It was part of the deals made behind the scenes for the election of President Joseph Aoun, and we've yet to see if Aoun and his new prime minister will uphold these terms, promising that that their opposition will be able, meaning Hezbollah and Amal, will be able to name the new finance minister, and perhaps some other cabinet posts, and to see if Amal and Hezbollah will have a true voice in the naming of the new army commander. So I think until we see that, there's not much we can say. I mean, it looks, for all intents and purposes, that Lebanon has swung the American way fully. Okay? But the devil is always in the details in Lebanon, and alliances shift, interests shift. Never, never does the other side do nothing in response to an action by their opposition. There's always actions and reactions here. So I think that's the next thing we're waiting for. But I think the most important thing is to look at what's going to happen. I mean, the ceasefire comes into effect, the 60 days of the ceasefire ends in 6 or 7 days from now. And Israel has still not moved out of key areas in the south of Lebanon. there's a schedule, right, for when they have to move out of areas and LAF or Lebanese armed forces have to move into these areas to secure them. And Israel continues to delay these things, even shoot at LAF soldiers and shoot at UNIFIL groups. Today, Israeli forces were caught bulldozing a cemetery in the vicinity of Tal Ismail in southern Lebanon. Last week reported that Israeli machinery was taking down trees, okay? These dementors, Death Eaters, cannot bear their losses in Gaza. We may even see an escalation as the ceasefire comes to an end. But here's the thing, like a lot of people have been thinking that maybe Israel won't withdraw after 60 days. Look at how it just ran amok during the ceasefire with nobody holding it back. Maybe they're going to relaunch a war. But here's why I think it's not going to happen based on criteria and the feeling today. All right, they're damaging everything in sight. That doesn't feel to me like an army that plans to be back. Do you know what I mean? It feels like an army that is just doing its worst before it has to withdraw. Okay, it's booby trapping a number of places. I don't know if we have footage or photos of some of the booby traps that were set up by the Israeli, terror forces in Lebanon. This is another sign they want to leave behind destruction after they're gone. But here's the more important thing. If they don't leave, they will compromise the entire leadership of the US-backed President Joseph Aoun, okay? The Americans do not want that. Plus, Trump has a new in-law, Mossad Boulos, the father-in-law of Tiffany Trump, a Lebanese, okay, who's also got his ear now, and he's like, no, let them get out, and let's just try to make calm there. Because again, Trump doesn't want, it wasn't just Gaza he wanted ended. He doesn't want any of this nonsense, he doesn't want distractions that he has to respond to every single day. That's just a time suck for him. So I think, to me, these things suggest that the Israelis will withdraw from Lebanon, and suddenly and very quickly. But I would say the other thing that looms over Lebanon is the financial crisis. I think two things are probably most important. The forces that would support an IMF loan, meaning the pro-US forces that are happy to be forever indebted and stuck with a debt burden that makes their debt and their financial security controlled by the US, they're in power now. And so it's possible we're looking at an IMF loan and severe austerity measures, okay, cutting a lot of jobs, public sector jobs, in the guise of bringing efficiency. But you actually need to run this country, and demanding maybe privatization of things and restructuring of things that don't benefit Lebanese depositors who have now waited since 2019, late 2019, to have access to their life savings. The other element of this is the people coming in against US-backed politicians. And maybe this is why Hezbollah and Amal are so ferociously seeking the position of Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Finance in the cabinet, because otherwise the Americans, the sort of power elite that back the Americans in this country, actually just the corrupt power elite will play with the numbers, make sure depositors get the absolute minimum back, where they will take the lion's share and distribute it to banks and whatever. No, the banks should take the biggest hits, And, we've heard from Wassim Mansouri, the acting governor of Banque du Liban, which is the central bank, that they've restructured things. There's no corruption at the central bank. We've made profits in the last, since August, of $2 billion. Lebanon's banking bank relationships with correspondent banks in foreign countries is excellent. There's no foreign restrictions on dealings. And then he talks about haircuts. He says the principle of haircuts must be carefully applied. A haircut essentially means, okay, using some mechanism to cut back what depositors can get back. Okay, so regular Lebanese civilians, the ones who don't have power, but have saved their money, who could not touch it for the last 5 years. These people should take the haircuts? No, they shouldn't. The financial institutions that have the fiduciary duty, and legal duty to safeguard the deposits of these, their account holders, are the ones who should take the biggest hit. And let me just tell you, the last 5 years, every single Lebanese bank, like if you want to do a wire transaction, one bank will charge you 7% of the amount you want to transfer. Another bank will charge you 12% of the amount. They're just raking it in, okay? So the haircuts is going to be very important. And if the Lebanese, who will get screwed by the IMF loans and austerity measures, don't want to get completely robbed blind, they should go on the streets and demand that the banks and the government absorbs the biggest blow, okay, and not the depositors. And that's something we'll see. But by the way, that's a card that the now Lebanese opposition, Hezbollah, Amal, and others, right, have in their hands, telling the Lebanese to go on the street and demand things better. So Aoun and Nawaf Salam need to play ball very much with their domestic opposition.
You're completely correct about IMF neoliberal shock therapy. What's coming to Lebanon in that regard is not we've seen it across the world. It's interesting too now that arrests have been made in the Beirut port explosion case. Judge Tarek Bitar. Honestly, it's like all of a sudden these news stories, these developments from 2021 that have been frozen since around early 2022 are all of a sudden again gaining traction. It's like and as you're saying, right, the financial crisis since 2019, all of a sudden, you need to put this back on the forefront. Karim, I want to hear your thoughts on the government formation, on the position of Hezbollah and Amal, and what's next for Lebanon.
Exactly what Sharmin said. We have to wait and see who are the ministers, and we will have to wait and see who is the head of the army will be, because nobody knows anything about both the current president and the current prime minister. They are not politicians. We only heard them the day they said they won the election, which was held from in the parliament, and people don't elect. And regarding these stuff that are emerging, I think they will blame, my logic says that they will blame them all in Hezbollah, and that's it. And nothing will change, if we will not know who was responsible for the port explosion, because there will be a Lebanese civil war if we do. And regarding what happened in the banks, exactly the same. There will be civil war before they they will put Riyad Salami in jail. So again, people in the comments say that I am negative. I'm not negative. That's my country. I lived here and I will die here. That's the case. The only way, in my vision, Lebanon will be like a real country if the people elect their president and he has a power, or the prime minister. Till now, it's the same. Every party or every single person that his father was famous 200 years ago should select ministers or two for his own interest. And this is Lebanon. And I have zero hope till now. Again, I will say the same thing that I said previously, and many people in the comments criticized me. Again, if the West don't want war in the region, Lebanon will thrive. If we are heading towards, Lebanon will remain the same now. You will see people losing more and more money.
Yeah, and the other thing, as you said, Esteban, things that weren't solved for years suddenly within weeks are being addressed. I mean, another one of those things is the Syrian refugees, right? They were, I mean, it really upholds our argument the Syrian refugees were not allowed to leave by Western powers, to go back to Syria to provide young men, to rebuild Syria, young men for the Syrian armed forces, Arab army. And now, everyone wants them out, and there's nothing stopping it because you have a pro-US government in Syria now. And if Syrian refugees
Yeah.
don't go
Democracy.
back, it's not because they were afraid of Assad, is it? They're now afraid of Al Qaeda, right? But the other thing that's happening in Lebanon specifically is, and this will be interesting to watch, is the reemergence of Saudi Arabia as in influence in this country. I think having decided Lebanon was not worth its blood, sweat, and tears in recent years, the Saudis have decided to play a role again in Lebanon. How that will manifest with the new leadership of Mohammed bin Salman will be interesting to watch, because it's not about like owning the Sunni street here again in its entirety. With what happened in Syria, the Saudi Arabia and the UAE, these two countries in particular, and of course there are others like Jordan, Egypt, etc. But these two countries in particular are very worried about expanding Turkish influence, which now can come right across the Syrian border. We will have a piece out hopefully this week about the plethora of arms coming across the Syrian border into Lebanon. And this, this is something. So basically, the Sunni versus Sunni, which we saw play out, okay, from the beginning of the so-called Arab Spring, which is like the Saudis and the Emiratis versus the Qataris and the Turks and the Egyptians and whatnot. It was a war against, between Sunni caliphs for influence, is now coming back to Syria because one side kind of got a royal flush, which is the Turks and the Qataris, and there's no way, no how the Saudis and Emiratis will tolerate that. And what happens in Syria impacts Lebanon, so we're seeing the Saudis come back when they don't have to. If the Americans have control and their allies, why would they bother? But no, they don't want the Turkish influence to seep in here. So there's a lot ahead for Lebanon, and I think the old neutrality that Lebanon has claimed in successive governments is just going to be the order of the day if it wants to not get stuck in the middle of these battles.
It's gonna be an interesting next few months. We'll keep an eye on everything, of course, and especially today, the arrival of Donald Trump. This major shift, I think, since his election. Since his election until today, it's where we've seen like all of these things that we thought were never gonna happen. It happened. Gaza ceasefire, Lebanese government, the fall of Syria. Uh, it's just one thing after the other. We'll see what comes next. But with that, I think we can wrap it up for this week. We want to thank you all for joining us. Again, direct you to our Patreon page where you can become a supporter of the Cradle, help us do the work that we do here, and to please follow us on Telegram, on Instagram, and on X. For the Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I've been joined by Sharmeen Narwani and Karim Shah.